Every dollar, every hour, every early morning and late night and weekend that was not really a weekend because the work followed you home and sat at the dinner table with you and kept you awake past midnight, running numbers you already knew by time. Heart. Every sacrifice made in a season of life when sacrifice felt like the only available option. Everything you went without so that the people you loved could have more than you did. You built something. Maybe it is a house. Maybe it is a retirement account that took 4 decades to reach the number printed on last month's statement. Maybe it is a modest savings that would not impress anyone from the outside, but that too represents, to you, the compressed form of an entire life's discipline and restraint and deferred gratification. Maybe it is simply the security of knowing that whatever comes next, the health expenses, the unexpected costs, the unpredictable terrain of the years ahead, you are not going to be a burden to anyone, that you are going to be okay. And now your children need something, or your grandchildren, or someone you love who is struggling in the way that people you love sometimes struggle, and whose struggle you feel in your own chest in the particular way that parents feel, the difficulties of their children regardless of how old those children are, and something in you, something that was built into you so early and so deeply that it no longer feels like a choice but simply like the right thing, the obvious thing, the thing that any decent parent does, is already moving toward, yes, already reaching for the checkbook, already beginning the internal negotiation about how much you can afford to give, with the answer almost always landing somewhere above what is genuinely comfortable and somewhere below what will actually solve the problem. Before you do that, I need you to hear something, not because giving to your children is wrong. It is not wrong. Generosity is one of the most genuinely beautiful things a human being can do with what they have built. And the impulse you feel toward the people you raised is real and it is good. And it comes from exactly the right place. But there is a difference between generosity and self-erasure, between giving from abundance and giving from fear, between the gift that comes freely from a position of security and the transfer that happens because you could not figure out how to say no to someone who was counting on you to say yes. And after 60 poor, that difference is not merely emotional. It is financial, legal, medical, and in ways that most people do not understand until it is too late. Existential. What I want to tell you today is what nobody in your life is positioned to tell you. Not your children, for obvious reasons. Not your friends, who are navigating the same pressures and who have their own complicated feelings about what good parents do. Not even, in many cases, the financial advisor who should be having this conversation with you but who is often more comfortable discussing portfolio allocation than the psychology of parental. The guilt. I want to tell you what actually happens. Not in theory, not in the worst-case scenario designed to frighten you, but in the real, documented, entirely ordinary experience of millions of people over 60 who gave generously and lovingly and with complete good intentions and who found themselves, years later, in positions they did not see coming and could not easily escape. The first thing you need to understand before you give your children anything after 60 is what Medicaid's 5-year look-back period actually means for you personally. Most people have heard the phrase. Very few people understand what it contains. If you ever need Medicaid to cover long-term care, nursing home care, skilled nursing facility, extended in-home care of the kind that Medicare does not adequately cover, and that can cost anywhere from $4,000 to $10,000 a month depending on where you live. Medicaid will look back at every financial transaction you made in the 5 years before your application. Every gift, every transfer, every dollar you gave to a child or a grandchild or a church or a charity. And if those transfers exceed what Medicaid considers acceptable, you will be penalized with a period of ineligibility, during which you will be responsible for your own care costs, the care you may no longer have the resources to pay for, because you already gave those resources away. This is not a theoretical risk designed to make you feel guilty for loving your family. According to AARP's Public Policy Institute, The average cost of a private room in a nursing home in the United States now exceeds $90,000 per year. The average length of stay requiring long-term care is approximately 2.5 years, with a significant percentage of people requiring care for 5 years or longer. The mathematics of that reality, applied to an asset base that has been significantly reduced by gifts made to adult children, can produce financial consequences that no amount of retrospective good intention can undo. Suze Orman, the financial educator who has spent decades trying to communicate exactly this reality to the people most at risk of ignoring it, has said, plainly and repeatedly, in ways that make some people uncomfortable, that you cannot take care of anyone else if you cannot take care of yourself, that the financial security you have built is not primarily an inheritance waiting to be distributed. It is your protection against the specific and expensive vulnerabilities of later life, and giving it away before those vulnerabilities arrive is not generosity. It is, in her words, a financial plan built on hope and guilt rather than math and reality. She is right. And the reason most people never hear this said so plainly is that it is uncomfortable. It implicates real love and real relationships in a conversation that most people would rather keep in the domain of numbers and portfolios. But the love and the numbers are not separate. They live in the same house, and what happens to one eventually happens to the other. The second thing you need to understand before you give your children anything after 60 is the difference between a gift and a rescue, and what repeatedly rescuing an adult child actually does to both of you. This is the harder conversation, because it requires honesty about the dynamic that exists in certain family relationships. Not all of them, but enough that I would be doing you a disservice to avoid it. There are adult children who are struggling through genuine, circumstantial, temporary difficulty, job loss, medical crisis, a divorce that restructured their finances overnight, who receive parental help once and use it, stabilize themselves and move forward with their lives. That help is a genuine gift in every sense of the word. It serves its purpose and releases both parties cleanly. And then there are situations that look similar from the outside but function very differently, where the transfer happens not once but repeatedly, where the financial need seems to resolve temporarily and then reconstitute itself in a slightly different form, where the parent's help has become, over time, not a bridge to stability but a substitute for it, where the adult child has, without anyone explicitly choosing it, come to build their financial life around the reliable availability of parental resources that were never meant to be permanent. The psychologist and author Dr. Henry Cloud, whose work on boundaries has influenced clinical thinking on family dynamics for decades, describes what he calls the law of sowing and reaping, the principle that people learn and grow through experiencing the natural consequences of their choices, and that consistently removing those consequences on someone else's behalf does not protect them from difficulty. It delays their development. It prevents them from building the capacities that difficulty, properly experienced, would have produced. The rescue that feels like love in the moment is sometimes, over a longer timeline, the thing that keeps a person from becoming who they needed to become. This is not an argument for withholding help from people you love. It is an argument for asking, honestly, before you write the check, is this helping them or is it helping me avoid the discomfort of saying no? Is this bridging a genuine gap, or is it substituting for a foundation they need to build themselves? Is this a gift I am giving freely, or is it a payment I am making to relieve the guilt of a request I never wanted to receive? Those questions have different answers in different families and different situations. But they are the right questions, and most people never ask them because asking them requires confronting something about the relationship that is more complicated than the simple story of a loving parent helping a struggling child. The third thing you need to understand before you give your children anything after 60, and this one tends to land with a particular force when people hear it clearly for the first time, is that your home is not a gift you can afford to give. while you are still alive and still need it. The family home holds a particular emotional weight in most families that makes it one of the most common and most dangerous transfers that people over 60 make. The house where the children grew up, the house that represents, in compressed physical form, the accumulated sacrifice and love of a family's entire history together. There is enormous pressure, sometimes explicit and sometimes simply felt, to keep that house in the family, to pass it on, to give it to the child who needs it, or the child who would appreciate it, or simply to avoid the estate process by transferring it now while you are still here to see it happen. What most people do not know, and what the attorney or the financial planner who should be having this conversation with them frequently does not raise unless asked directly, is what happens to Medicaid eligibility and to your own housing security when you transfer your home to your children before your death. The 5-year look-back period applies to home transfers exactly as it applies to cash gifts. If you transfer your home to your children today and need Medicaid-covered long-term care within the next 5 years, that transfer will be treated as a disqualifying transaction. You will face a penalty period, and your children, who now legally own the home you have spent a lifetime paying for, may or may not be in a position, financially, emotionally, or practically, to return what they were given in the form you needed returned. Beyond Medicaid, a home transferred to an adult child during the parent's lifetime loses the step-up in basis that it would receive upon inheritance at death. A tax distinction that can translate, depending on how long the home was owned and how much it has appreciated, into a capital gains tax liability that eliminates a significant portion of its value when the child eventually sells it. Dave Ramsey, who has spent his career making financial reality accessible to people who were never given the tools to understand it, has said consistently that giving your house to your children while you are still living is one of the most financially dangerous moves an older parent can make for the parent's security and, frequently, for the child's tax situation. The house belongs in your estate, not in your children's names. Not yet. The fourth thing you need to understand before you give your children anything after 60 is what your money is actually for. This sounds like a strange question. Money is for the people you love. Money is for security and comfort and the ability to handle whatever comes. Money is for building something and passing it on to the next generation, which is perhaps the oldest and most deeply human use of it. All of that is true, but there is a sequence to it that matters enormously and that the emotional pressure of the present moment tends to collapse. Your money after 60 is first and most essentially for you. For the health care you have not yet needed but will, for the living expenses of the years ahead, which are not predictable in their duration or their cost, for the dignity of not requiring your children to financially support you in the way you may currently be financially supporting them, which is the most genuinely generous thing you can provide to them, even if it looks, in the short term, like withholding. Warren Buffett, who has thought about the philosophy of inheritance more carefully and more publicly than perhaps any living person, has said that he believes in giving his children enough to do anything, but not enough to do nothing. That the most damaging thing a parent can do financially is remove from their children the necessity that produces capability. That inheritance, given at the wrong time and in the wrong amounts, is not a gift but a subtraction of the very experiences that would have made the recipient more of themselves. He is describing something that most parents feel instinctively but rarely say out loud. That the help which costs the parent their security and spares the child their difficulty is not the transaction it appears to be. That the love driving it is real but the math is wrong, and that real love that sees the whole person across the whole timeline rather than simply the struggling version standing in front of you right now, sometimes looks, in the short term, like saying no. The fifth and final thing I need you to understand before you give your children anything after 60 is the difference between what you owe them and what you want to give them. You owe your children the love you gave them, the years of your attention and your presence and your effort, the values you tried to transmit. imperfectly and persistently across the decades of their formation. You owe them the honest relationship you are still capable of having with them, the one in which you tell the truth, including the truths they find difficult to hear, because that is what it means to love someone as a fully realized person, rather than someone you are perpetually trying to protect from discomfort. You do not owe them your retirement. You do not owe them your home. You do not owe them the financial security you spent a lifetime building on the grounds that their need is urgent and your love is strong, and saying no feels like a failure of parental duty that you cannot bring yourself to commit. That guilt, the specific, persistent, entirely understandable guilt of a parent who has something when their child needs something, is real. It is not a manipulation. In most cases, it is simply the natural and inevitable pressure of a love that does not know how to hold boundaries without feeling like betrayal. But here is what I know to be true. From everything I have read and observed and understood about what actually happens to families in the long arc of these decisions, the parent who protects their financial security, who gives thoughtfully and within genuine limits, who says no when no is the honest answer, who maintains the resources necessary to remain independent and unconstrained through whatever the next decade brings. That parent does not love their children less. They love them differently. They love them in the way that a person who has remained whole can love someone, fully, clearly, without the complicated resentment that grows quietly in people who gave more than they had and found themselves, years later, dependent on the very children they sacrificed for, and the children, in most cases, the adult children who are capable of genuine reflection rather than simply the relief of immediate need. Those children do not need their parents' money as much as they need their parents' presence, their parents' example, their parents' continued aliveness and agency and capacity to be in the relationship as a full and independent person, rather than someone who gave everything away and is now quietly running out of options. Your security is the gift. Your presence, financially stable and emotionally whole and not quietly afraid of what happens if one more expensive thing goes wrong. That is the inheritance worth more than any asset you could transfer today. Before you give your children anything after 60, ask yourself one question. Ask it honestly, without the immediate pressure of the request or the guilt of the moment or the performance of what a good parent looks like from the outside. Ask, will this make both of us more or will it make me less, so that they do not have to feel what they are currently feeling? The answer to that question is the only answer that matters. And you already know it. You have always known it. You built something across the entire length of your working life. It belongs to you. Protect it with the same discipline and the same love and the same clear-eyed honesty that built it in the first place. That is not selfishness. That is wisdom. And wisdom at this age is the most generous thing you have left to give.